And alongside that, Vandana, you've also majored on the involvement of women and women's role and women as part of the work to a fairer world. And I also would like to say that with those conversations, we wanted reflection as well as inspirational speakers. And we feel that what your work over many years, you've reflected deeply on how can ordinary people and people with not loads of immediate power take on huge corporations and governments. And that is a source of inspiration for us. And just the final thing I'd like to say, why we're so pleased you've come, is that you have offered continuously over the years a clear vision for the future, things like Earth democracy and the Earth Charter. And we believe that in this present time, we really need this hopeful future. So thank you very much for coming. And I'll now pass on to Jagdish.
Thank you. Thank you, Helena. Thank you, Gwen. And Vandana ji, thank you so much for accepting our invitation and being the third participant in what we call Earth Conversations, a very new initiative, but one that is really getting us to talk about issues and create spaces that were not there within ASP before. As Gwen mentioned, we are a group of alumni, one from the Responsible Business Practice at Bath, and like me, others are from the Ashridge Sustainability Masters, and practitioners who have joined in. And actually, it's the alums who joined ASP, and together we now, have created this platform called Earth Conversations within ASP. So we are grateful to Gwen, to ASP for hosting us. We are honored to have you. Dr. Vandana Shiva, I can only say that we have with us a feisty, energetic, unrelenting person who always wants to go to the root of the matter. And for that matter, actually what comes before the root, the seed. I've had the honor of visiting in India, in Dehradun, a well-known destination called Bija Vidyapeeth, Earth University and Navdanya, which works to protect seeds as our heritage. And without doubt, the ultimate gift of life, of heritage, of continuity, as Vandana ji would often explain. And to quote Navdanya itself, I'll read a line: conserving seed is conserving biodiversity, conserving knowledge of the seed, its utilization, culture, and sustainability. All of it comes from the seed. I've stayed on the Bija Vidyapeeth campus, attended sessions on a wonderful course that used to be called Gandhi and Globalization, and now is called Gandhi, Globalization, and Earth Democracy. It is here that I first met, had a long conversation with Satish Kumar that led to a book that is now under publication, which is tentatively titled Abundant Love. So for me personally, Dr. Shiva, you have been home to some amazing conversations. You made it possible. I was a guest there and you were hosting us, and that's so nice. So you're very special. I mean, you nurtured us there. The conversations built me, they made me, they allowed me to think differently. My background is as a journalist, and we are deadline driven people. Journalists don't have a very good image these days. Those, the sensations that you see in India, certainly the media has gone in a very wrong way. So you were the one who really gave me the space to have not the short conversation, but the long conversation that helps us understand the complexity that we all live in. Some of these conversations and those learning opportunities that you provided me, I came back and looked at the site, and the one word that strikes me is a simple one that I think Vandana ji brings out again and again, that is alive, being alive, being living. The seed is living, the soil is alive, the earth is living, food is living, and we can live well as long as we learn to recognize that life on earth is what holds us, feeds us, nurtures us, makes us who we are. This is a simple message. It's a powerful message. I got it from you. I naturally and immediately relate to it, and I can only be grateful to you. I won't take much time, but I want to say that there has already been a lot of buzz on the email thread since we knew that you would be here. Many questions have cropped up, and we'll allow as many as can come up today. I'm tempted to say I'm talking about and for a proud Indian, except that you know and I know that Vandana Shivaji is a global citizen, belongs to the world, and her work certainly is very useful for the entire world. She has challenged some of the biggest, the most powerful money bags on our planet. And it is shocking, or maybe it is not shocking to see it is built, targeted, or in an organized manner against some of the work that she's doing. This is a fight for earth democracy, for justice, peace, sustainability, which is also the title of the book. I've said enough. I want to say no more. I have a lot to say, but I'll hand over to you, Vandana ji. Please, take the time, give us your opening remarks, and then Gwen will lead us through Q&A, and then we'll come back and probably summarize. Thank you so much. I am honored. I am grateful. I'm filled with gratitude. Thank you.
Thank you, Jagdish. There's an echo coming. So, should I try again? Yeah, better. So thank you, Jagdish. Thank you, Helena. And thank you very much, Gwen, and the team that created the Earth Conversations. For me, a conversation is a two-way flow. It's about listening.
Hello, my darling.
It's about responding. It's about participating. And that means you have to be in a living process. Conversations are therefore living exchanges between living beings. There is, of course, a world of non-conversation, of one-way dominating relationships, which are not about participation, they are not about listening, and they're definitely not about hearing the pain. So it's not that there are two kinds of conversations in the world right now. There's conversations and absence of conversations, whether it be between us and all the earth beings, or it be between human beings, different kinds of human beings. For the first part of my life, my main conversation was with the psi function, the Schrödinger psi function in quantum theory. My decade of the 70s was spent conversing with nature through the quantum world. And for me, it was in a world that was alive. It was a world that was teaching me about non-separation, about uncertainty, about potential, about no exclusion, no excluded middle, always and, not just and, either or. And it's the Chipko movement that really taught me so much. I got involved in the Chipko movement very early on in the 70s. And I realized from my sisters who came out to protect the Himalayan forests that the forests are living. The rivers that flow from them are living. And there's a connection between the forests and the rivers. They said, you think this is dead timber? These forests are our mothers. They give us soil and water and pure air. And about 50 years before the ecological services and functions of nature came into the discourse, the women were talking about the multiple contributions. And I remember, I had to learn what it meant going to the forest, collecting a fodder, collecting fuel wood. And, they'd stop and have a conversation with the trees and apologize to the trees and say, I know I'm hurting you, but I will not take more than I need. I promise I will not be greedy. And then they would be in the forest singing the music I used to hear from the forest. That is a conversation. That's a conversation within Earth democracy and with us as beings of the earth. I have heard over these years since I started saving seed, about which Jagdish has talked. I've learned from the seed. I've not just learned from the seed in terms of all the best of human qualities that we forgot. The ability to renew, regenerate, the ability to create abundance. One seed into 100, 1,000, 1,000,000. The family of crops that are my favorite crops, which are forgotten foods called primitive grains, like all of us who were colonized were called primitive people. Our biodiversity was called primitive, our knowledge disappeared. But these so-called primitive grains are the grains of the future. And the millets have their name from the fact that one makes a million, not a million in 1 to the 6, but a million in terms of the Latin million, yeah. But basically hundreds of thousands. Just see a little finger millet, a little jowar, a little bajra, that abundance. And I had saved seeds. You know, I remember in Bangalore, outside Bangalore, I'd gone to an old woman and I was collecting seeds wherever I could. And she said, you know, I haven't used the seed for 40 years. It's been down in my, you know, grain bin. And now I'm not doing farming, but let me go and see. And she gave me this handful of ragi. 40 years later, it didn't just flourish, but it did brilliantly. From the pyramids, they have found these ancient wheats called the kamut that still fertilize. So the power of the seed is a conversation we need to have. But the seed is a conversation with the past. That's what I have learned through our seed saving. I remember I was traveling the length and breadth of my country to tell people that now they want to own and patent the seed through WTO and the GATT. And I'd come across this from a meeting in 1987 to which I'd been invited in Geneva. And I sort of on the flight back, I said, how do you deal with people who want to own life on earth? And who say 5 of us will control all seed in the world? By the year 2000, only 5 companies will control the seed of the world through patents and through genetic engineering and through an international treaty or trade-related intellectual property rights agreement of WTO. So I started to do 3 things: started to save seeds, started to travel the country to create awareness, started to work with our parliament and our government. And those days we did have sovereign decision-making and democratic decision-making, and we wrote laws. But while I was traveling, explaining what is happening in the international arena, I remember this woman got up in the tribal area, which is now Chhattisgarh, was then Madhya Pradesh, which is the rice bowl of India, where more than 200,000 rice varieties evolved. 200,000 through the brilliance of tribal farmers. And in Navdanya, the movement that has a seed bank in Dehradun, but we have seed banks in Orissa, we have seed banks in Chhattisgarh. We've saved more than 4,000 varieties of rice. Rices that can tolerate salt and flood and drought, and rices, you know, that are green and black and blue and purple, rices that are aromatic, and rices that are healing, and rices that help lactating mothers. You know, we just forgot that people have been breeding seed for centuries. So here I am talking about intellectual property rights and the GATT. And this tribal woman gets up and tells me 2 things. She says, so first they came and said our land was theirs. They came and said the forest was theirs. This was the British Empire's enclosures in India. And then she says, so now they want the seeds of the forest and our seeds in a plant. It's the same process. And we'll have to do the same thing as we did in terms of our freedom movement. And the second thing she said is, come back and visit us for a beautiful ceremony that we do called Akti. And I went back. The village collects all its seeds. And that time, I think the village had about 200 rice varieties. They bring them together. There was no plastic. They were in beautiful bowls of green leaves. They put it together. And then they enact the whole year. And their god, their divinity, is a rock, a little piece of snow. That's their village deity. They offer it to the village deity and say, we'll do everything. We'll do everything to take care of you and your seed. Bless our efforts. Let us have a harvest and next year's seeds. And then they take back bits of the seed through mixing. They mix it. And then they take and plant 21 seeds in a moist cloth as a testing. If all of them germinate, then all the seed is good. And then they choose what they plant. If one doesn't germinate, they increase the seed rate. If 3 don't germinate, they don't use the seed. That's the level of scientific accuracy, which has given stability in seed. I have known now case after case where 100% of the Monsanto's hybrid corn failed. Case after case where the BT cotton failed and got farmers into debt. So the conversation of the seed is with the past and the history of the seed, but its evolutionary potential, because in that seed is the power to become seed in the future. And in quantum theory, David Bohm's brilliant book on enfoldment, that in the quanta is enfolded the future unfolding of life, of the quanta. So in the seed is enfolded the future evolution of the earth and people. And that's a conversation. The seed is having a conversation with herself, with our past generation, our future generation. She's having a beautiful, brilliant conversation with the living soil organisms. And the soil organisms themselves are having a conversation among themselves. 1 teaspoon, in 1 gram of organic soil, 30,000 protozoa, 50,000 algae, 400,000 fungi. Yeah, in 1 teaspoon, 1 billion bacteria, which translates into ton per acre. And the soil fungi are what bring nutrition to the plant. In 1 cubic inch, 8 miles of this fungi. Albert Howard, who was sent to India in 1905, was a true scientist. True scientists have conversations. They don't engage in propaganda. And he was sent to improve Indian agriculture and sent to a place called Pusa in Bihar. And he arrived and he says the soils were fertile. There were lots of insects, but no damage. No insect was a pest. And he said, I could not improve the system. The best I could do is make the pests and the peasants my professors. And he wrote a book called The Agricultural Testament, which became the basis of the creation of the Soil Association by Eve Malcolm. I was accused by those who don't listen of bringing organic from the West, and I'm an importer of foreign technologies. I started Howard lectures and said, let's remember that Howard had a conversation with Indian peasants. He had a conversation with the pest and brought us the amazing system of practicing an agriculture that doesn't do violence. A seed is having a conversation with the bees when it becomes a plant and starts to flower. And there's an ancient Vedic saying that you want to practice a good economy, be the economy between the flower and the bee. The bee doesn't harm the flower doesn't harm the bee gets honey, and the flower gets pollination and fertility. That is the creativity of nature. That's the conversation that nature has. And then the same seed becomes food, it's fertilized, becomes fruit, it becomes grain, and we eat it. That is the conversation between the 100 trillion microbes in our gut. 100 trillion, we're only 10% of us. Life is a conversation. And as I've written in my book on food and health, and I want to share this with you, I have learned over these years that growing food is joining the seed and soil in a conversation of life. And I have learned since then that eating is a conversation between the soil, the plants, the cells in our gut, the cells in our food, and between our gut and our brain. Eating is an intelligent act at the deepest cellular and microbial level. The cellular communication is the basis of health and well-being. It is also the root of disease. Poisoned food creates disease. It's a toxic non-conversation. We might be ignorant about the links between food and health, but our cells know when that relationship is broken. Our body seems to be more intelligent than the reductionist mechanical mind that the contemporary humans have developed and deployed. And if we could listen to our bodies, our knowledge would be more in sync with the intelligence of our bodies, which is the real intelligence of our minds, because the gut is the second brain. Science is recognizing that. And because food carries with it the memory of the biodiversity in the soil and the plants, how food is grown is a major determinant of health. Through the ecological science of agroecology and Ayurveda, our minds can catch up with the intelligence of the earth, the conversations within the earth, and our bodies. Eating is an act of communication. In eating, we communicate with the earth, the farmer, and those who transform our food. And our food communicates with the beneficial bacteria in our gut. And through that communication, our health is maintained and our resilience to diseases increased. We need to revisit these conversations, both for the earth's health and for our health. And I would add for our freedom and our democracy. How did the conversation stop? The conversation stopped because they've worked so hard to declare the earth is not living and is dead. The earth is terra nullius became the legal jurisprudence. Bacon was made the father of modern science for writing a book, The Birth of Masculine Time, declaring that subjugating the earth and making her your slave was scientific progress. He had done no science. He had tortured people during the Inquisition. He was the one who used to torture people. He used to torture the peasants who were rebelling against the enclosures, and he was torturing women. And he brings that scientific method to how to torture nature, and he writes about it in his books. And then the Royal Society is created to bring this masculine view to the world. I've written about it in my book of the 80s, when I was trying to make sense between why is it the women of the mountains rise to protect the forest? And why is it their worldview to destroy the forest and reduce it to timber and profits and revenue? And so I started to study the roots of history of science, and I found Bacon, and I found Descartes, who says, I'm a thinking thing without a body. Poor man, I mean, he it's because he had people to feed him and take care of him that he could even try and deny the body. But the same mind that denies our body denies the equality of the human being in terms of women, the equality of all human beings in terms of our diversity of religions and race and color, and created what I have called an ecological apartheid. Apartheid is the Afrikaans word for separation, and it was institutionalized in South Africa. Actually, the law was made in 42, but it was the separation was being practiced first on Indians, because you see the Africans had been displaced, their land had been taken, but the colonizers needed people to do their legal practices. They needed them to plant their sugarcane. They needed them to do the agriculture. And therefore they took indentured labor, because by then slavery was illegal, and they took lawyers like Gandhi. Gandhi went to South Africa to fight his early cases. And then he was thrown out of the first class compartment in Pietermaritzburg. And he woke up to race, because while he was studying law in England, he didn't experience racism of that kind, but he was woken up to racism. And then in 1906, they passed a law called the Indian Act to discriminate against Indians. You can't practice professions, you can't trade, you can't go to the same schools, you have to carry a certification, a registration all the time. And the Indians said, but this is slavery, and we are equal citizens. And with the Indian community, they organized a satyagraha. That was Gandhi's first civil disobedience, not in India, in South Africa. He wrote a brilliant book called Satyagraha in South Africa. And they continued from 1906 to 1911, when the British were forced to withdraw that act. But he wrote his brilliant book on freedom in 1909 on the ship from England to South Africa, in Swaraj, How to Be Free. What freedom for India means. It's the course. It's the book we use in the Gandhi Globalization and Earth Democracy course. And I hope some of you will join. And we also do in October a course on how to return to the earth, to have a conversation with the earth in order for us to be alive and to bring the earth back to life. So the first conversation end was with the dead earth construction and the apartheid construction, artificial separation. And with it went anthropocentrism, because once a colonizer had proven themselves that we are superior, then it didn't take any time to say, no, 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 the earth is not one family. You know, other species are lower than us. I mean, if other species are lower than us, other humans with different colors are lower than us, our colonies, our people are lower than us, it becomes extremely easy to stop the conversations. If the earth is dead, you can't converse with her. If the land is merely property, you don't talk to the land or get instruction from it. As all indigenous cultures said, land is the source of our instruction. And that's why Australian Aborigines have been able to farm for 60,000 years and not leave a footprint. And for Cook, the fact that there was an absence of an ecological footprint was the reason to declare terra nullius. This is empty, otherwise they'd have damaged the land, assuming that destruction is the human trait. And then you had the chemical agriculture, beginning with I.G. Farben and Hitler and Nazi Germany. And then all these factories that have these chemical capacities decided they're going to apply to agriculture. And they redefined agriculture from being a conversation with the seed and the soil and the earth and the farmer. They turned it into a non-conversation between raw chemicals and the earth. It was called the Green Revolution. It wasn't green, wasn't revolutionary. And I was drawn to study this because violence erupted in Punjab, where the Green Revolution was first implemented, 1984. I'd studied in Punjab University when I was doing my MSc honors in physics. So I knew it as a different land. And I had this puzzle. I said, it was prosperous and peaceful. How did it become this? And how did the Nobel Peace Prize get given to Mr. Norman Borlaug for leaving this ruin? So I did a book called The Violence of the Green Revolution. And that book was a conversation between, what I knew, the scientists, the farmers in Punjab. And it was a very different story from what was being told. What the story was, we were starving, we were dying. No, the last famine in India was during the British colonial times, the Great Bengal famine. We haven't had famine since then. But the other story that was told was this was about communalism and hate. No, people weren't killing each other on religions. We were being targeted because they were controlling the system. And as the farmers were saying, this is slavery. We can't decide what seed we'll grow. We can't decide how we'll grow it. We can't decide how the waters will be used. We can't decide what price our produce will be sold at. And they were the first to say that chemical controlled corporate agriculture is a slavery system. And 84 to now, 14 months they were protesting around Delhi. They had surrounded Delhi because of new laws that would have totally destroyed them. Just there are new laws in England to totally wipe out the last farmer. The third, death of conversation. Well, during the Green Revolution time, and but when I see there's a problem, I try and understand and solve the puzzle. And when A, something doesn't hang together, 2, it's causing a lot of harm, I then go deeper into it. And that's my scientific inquiry and my human compassion. And I learned from Einstein, the two are not separate. True science is true compassion. True compassion has to be in action and in thought. So every textbook I read said the soil is an empty container. Power was given to the chemicals that destroy the soil. So it shifted, the conversation shifted to becoming propaganda. The war machinery declared certain things and everyone fell into it. Books were written, all the agricultural scientists from that time onwards repeat that propaganda. And then they said, well, seed, we are the inventors. We've made the seed. We are the owners, we are the patent holders. So I started to look at patents, intellectual property, GMOs, taught myself everything that needed to be done. And I'm happy to say the United Nations appointed me to be on the biosafety expert group because I was raising these questions at the UN Earth Summit in 1992. I was saying, we need to look at the impact of biodiversity of the new GMOs. There were no new GMOs commercialized then. They were starting to plan it. And out of this, we got an international law on on biosafety. Of course, those who are worried about biosafety, who are not very happy with the fact that not only have we created legal frameworks, we've created research systems, and that's the group that spent so much time trying to prove I've never studied science. And I say, even if I hadn't, so what? Yeah, a farmer's truth is a farmer's truth. The truth of the soil is the truth of the soil. The truth of the seed is the truth of the seed. 5 corporations who want to control the seed cannot extinguish that truth. They cannot silence that corporation. So we managed to write laws that seeds, plants, and animals are not human inventions. Truth. They are our earth family. So we have an article called 3J. I've worked with our parliament to put this article in our patent law. Monsanto has been very troubled by this. So they keep challenging it. The last time they brought it to the courts to challenge it was just before lockdown. And they're standing in the courts and the lawyer is saying, seed is an empty container. And it becomes a Superman with the chemicals and the DNA we put into it. Seed, life doesn't exist. It's the death of conversation. Now, they're moving very, very rapidly to a fascinating new non-conversation, absence of conversation. Food, as I said, eating, growing food is a communication. I have learned over these 40 years of working with seed and food that not only is food a conversation, food is the currency of life. That's what flows. There's a nutrition cycle. A nutrition cycle in normal terms is a food system. Web of life is a food web. And that is why in cultures like India, we've held the food as sacred. We say Annam Brahman, food the creator. And even more importantly, we say everything comes from food, and it's true. The seed begins, food goes back to seed. That's how soil fertility comes. The whole web is maintained by food. So when you see food in the conversation of life, you have a very different relationship with it. But those who got used to manipulating seed for patenting are now saying, oh my gosh, if these 7.7 billion people on this planet could be fed fake food with patents, we will do so well. They're seeing trillions of dollars. And just like the war industry had no rule in the food system, but hijacked our agriculture and our seed with their chemicals, right now it's the 30 years of liberalization and the 2 years of COVID lockdown has allowed the technology billionaires to become the real rich people on the world and decision makers. So while we were locked down, they walked away with 1.5 trillion additional dollars. 1.5 trillion. And they are now moving into our food. Now, I wouldn't trust Silicon Valley with our food, but I want to give you 2 examples of the death of conversation with food and about food. So in the US, they created this thing called the Impossible Burger. It's called the Impossible Burger. And the Impossible Burger basically is about making fake meat. And the fake meat is made from GMO soya. And the person, Pat Brown, who's the one who's considered the man behind it, he says, I wanted to see what is good for the planet and people, and I picked GMO soya. Well, if he'd done any studies, he'd have realized GMO soya has killed all the monarch butterfly because it's Roundup resistant. It has killed all the soil organisms. Roundup residues are leading to cancer. There are no surviving pollinators in these fields of BT cotton and GMO soya. He looked at them before, we saw the safest and most environmentally responsible option. And they went on to make an Impossible Burger with 14 patents. And then they started to create fake meat and worse, fake blood. And a lot of people, they talk about plant-based food. And And I say, you want to be a vegetarian? Why don't you just be a vegetarian? Why do you want to use genetically engineered yeast to produce heme, a magic molecule that is blood, to pour into this meat burger? Why do you want to eat violent meat and pretend you're getting away from violence? But it isn't just there. A lot of people are feeling, oh, we're being nice to animals. But Mr. Pat Brown's ontology is saying animals are an unimprovable technology, so they must go, they must disappear. And I watched this kind of thinking joining with intolerance and fundamentalism that turned the sacred cow in India in 3 years into abandoned animals. The biggest problem farmers are facing, first, it's been made illegal to trade animals and move in, and animal affairs is all illegal now, it's controlled. But worse, when they can't take care of the cattle, they leave them. And now animals are the big threat to agriculture. Big issue in the latest election, abandoned animals. And I keep saying, how can you think you're being nice to animals by robbing them of their homes, by robbing them of their caretakers? Because in India, for us, our relationship with the animals is as a family. I grew up with my mother who had cows, and she left her cow shed to me to start the research foundation. That's how I could start the research foundation. I said to her, I want to give up a university job, an institutional job, but I don't want to chase funders. And she said, don't, just take the cow shed. And my cow shed became not only my liberation, but taught me so much about love for animals. And then Mr. Pat Brown, who says animals are unimprovable technologies, first to put an anthropocentric measure of exploitative technologies as a measure of animals is the end of conversation in Earth democracy. But they're actually talking to precisely everyone who brought the problems in agriculture to have even higher benefits. So Bayer, who has bought Monsanto, is saying, in order for plant-based companies to produce at scale and succeed, they require efficient sources of amino acids and carbohydrates, which will bring them around to raw crops that only we can grow, that can be tilled and cultivated by machinery. So see the 3 things they insist. More raw cultivation, more monocultures, more fossil fuels, more machinery. This industrial agriculture has given us 50% of the greenhouse gases. I have a book called Soil Not Oil on this. It has given us 75% of the destruction of soil and water. My book, Who Really Feeds the World, that was written for the Milan Expo when I was ambassador for the government of Italy for the Milan Expo. And they wrote to the president of Italy to say, how could you have an ambassador? They wrote to the president of Italy to say, shed her ambassadorship, the Monsanto lobbyist. And the ambassador gave me an award. The president gave me a Rachel Carson Award. So it doesn't really work, this lobbying business. 90% of the biodiversity has gone, of insects, of plants. Worse, 75% chronic diseases are now being recognized to be linked to food and our gut microbiome. And as my recent writings during the pandemic show, even the new infectious diseases that are emerging from forests, 300 new diseases, have come because we've invaded to grow GMO soya in Amazon, palm oil in Indonesia, not to feed people, but because now food is a commodity. The same commodity will go for biofuel, will go for animal feed, and will go for GMO processed food and fake food. And once you do that, there's no limit to how much land you need for this. With these fake food, carbohydrate production, if everyone is deprived of growing real food and stopping the conversation of food, we will need so much acreage in the world that everything will need to be put to carbohydrate and protein protection for these lab-made non-foods, anti-foods. Those viruses on those animals, those fleas on those animals, that is what's now moving into human populations. and creating new diseases, HIV, Ebola, Zika, monkey disease, limitless, Nile virus, it goes on and on and on. The story of COVID is a little more complicated because there are 3 or 4 narratives about it, and many others have been silenced. But it's interesting, they keep popping up with the fact, oh, the wet markets, and it's been proven, no, it didn't come from the Chinese farmers markets. It's come from somewhere else, either from the bats that were captured from caves or from gain in function. And that will be a story that will eventually be told in a truthful conversation. But this much we know, that the end of conversation in living becomes a non-conversation for extinction. Extinction of farmers, extinction of cows. There's a new project on bees, on honey without bees. And it's being argued as if it's going to be nice to bees to see them disappear. And I don't know how the human mind has reached a place to see extinction as saving the organism that you're pushing to extinction. And I think it comes from that idea of civilizing mission. The genocide that was part of colonialism was always done in the name of a civilizing mission. 90% of Native Americans disappeared to help us be civilized. And I think this deep ingraining of superiority, of liberation defined by the other, dominating other, is the end of conversation. And at this point where we know we're facing extinction, we're facing climate catastrophe, we're facing the COVID, and we're facing the lockdowns, and we're facing the greed virus. I've just done a book last year, which come out now in Italy, or should come out next year in England. I wrote it, and it's called The Economy, from Greed to Care. And I know there was a question, which I will wait to be asked, to talk about how the care as a very compassionate conversation is being reduced to something else, and how preventing the hijack of our minds, that continuing to have honest conversations with us and reality is the survival imperative of our times. So I'm glad I was able to join you. I'm happy to have a conversation in terms of any dialogue, any participation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vandana. That was indeed a tour de force of lots of different conversations, which seem to be the same conversation ultimately, if you go deep enough. Very insightful. I'll now invite 2 people. First of all, I know Jagdish has a question that he'd like to ask. While Jagdish is asking that question, I invite everyone else to submit questions into the chat, and I'll then pick the questions from there and invite you to step forward. So Jagdish, if you would like to pose your question to Vandana.
Certainly. Vandanaji, that was lovely hearing you. As energetic as ever. Thank you. I wanted to start this conversation by asking you, are things getting better or are they getting worse? I mean, the fact remains that Monsanto was a valuable company bought by another company wanting to make more money out of it. The fact remains that biodiversity is down. The fact remains that seeds are patented. The fact remains that we have this impossible burger and fake food trademarked, and you could see it and you could see it promoted. So are we getting anywhere nearer to where we want to? Or do you think humanity is losing its path and there is just so much of this fakeness around that we seem to be missing the central point for all the activism that we do?
Yeah, now, Jagdish, I think if you realize that the world is full of controlled media, controlled science, and that the noises of non-conversation are louder. It's like wedding noises, in your neighborhood, they come up in India, and there are days they are louder than your conversation in your drawing room. But if you give in to that, and you give up your conversations, then it is, of course, everything is getting bad. I think I've always maintained a sense of balance and proportion in life. The first is I always see them as very few, very powerful, but very few. You know, 5 corporations wanting to control the sea, they're now 4. 10 billionaires. That's a very small number to try and control all of the world. It's very small. The second is that with Hitler, we saw you can build your edifice on propaganda, but sooner or later, these systems crumble. Because true conversations that nourish the living communication is what sustains life in nature and in society. The other can be kept artificially in place for a little while with coercion. And that's why Gandhi is important, because he reminded us that only non-violence allows self-rule and self-governance and freedom and democracy. Coercive power allows a dinning of noise. But at least following Gandhi, I realized that is the pretense of power. The practice of power is self-rule, self-organization, democracy. And when it comes to, are things going better or going worse, I think things are spreading. More and more people are realizing we've been taken for a ride. When I started, I was the first to critique the Green Revolution, totally ostracized. Started the GMO patent issue, totally ostracized. But then those became laws. Today, ecological agriculture is totally prevalent. And I do hope that our conversations on fake food will allow people to recognize the violence in that Impossible Burger. And I say to a lot of the vegans, I say, if veganism is about nonviolence, then you have to look at nonviolence of the system. That's why Gandhi is important. He didn't look at words. He didn't look at products. He looked at the whole process that connects everything. And that's why he built out the spinning wheel and the charkha. And I took inspiration from that and started to save the seed. I said, so the seed will be the charkha for today, when now we have the empire over life. So I think, the part of nature is quite clearly stronger. Yeah. Every storm, she's screaming. Her conversation is there. Every storm, every flood, she is speaking with her pain, with her tears. But more people are waking up to it. And then there's a handful which is able to orchestrate everything. But, it happened before, but it'll never last forever.
Wonderful. Yeah, that's very inspiring. Yeah, which is very true also. Yes, it's Gwen.
Thank you, Vandana. Jean, you wanted to ask a question about the relationship between scientific inquiry and human compassion. Feel free to articulate your question now.
Yes, thank you. Hi, Vandana. I've also studied quantum physics and completely agree with you about it. It kind of addles your brain early. It's that kind of systemic interrelational quality that it imbues. It does kind of you take it along with you. I just wanted to ask you a little bit more about something that you said, where you started talking about the relationship between scientific inquiry and human compassion. And then you started to say, I think that human compassion is kind of embedded in the right sort of scientific inquiry. And I wondered if you could say a little bit more about what you were thinking there.
Yeah. As a young child, I read a little book by Einstein's Essays on Science and Society or something. And that's what, said, I want to be like this. This is what I want to do. Both society concern and seeking how nature works, the truth of nature. I don't think Bacon's scientific method is scientific inquiry, because he's not inquiring, he's blocking the listening. And I always laugh to myself. So this man who's called the founder of modern science killed himself by trying to stuff a chicken with ice to see how much it could tolerate the cold. And he got the pneumonia. a scientific inquiry would have gone a different way. He would not have died of pneumonia. So scientific inquiry is asking the questions of living systems, yeah, and letting them speak. In society, it means listening. I mean, for me, all of my life has been spent, you know, ever since I stepped out of the quantum world, in the sense of started to do ecological research. My first step is go to the communities that have been impacted and ask them, what's the issue? I learned long ago that only the one whose foot is hurting knows where the shoe pinches. Nike and the foot makers will not be able to tell you. So compassion as a process of conversation and participation then leads to true scientific inquiry, because you don't bring your privileged biases and your blind spots. Yeah, your mind gets open, just like Squanter opens up your mind. Compassion opens up your mind.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Vandana. Thank you.
That was a question from one physicist to another.
Steve in England, you had a question about carers control and mRNA technology.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I opened this conversation right at the beginning. It's very evident during the pandemic. I'm not how it was in India, but here. But and I was part of a conversation the other day of how care is being used as a way of control. So effectively, conversation was shut down. There was only one dominant narrative, and anybody who said anything against this narrative was quickly cancelled. And it's very difficult to argue against somebody who's saying, look, we're doing this for the right reasons, for good reasons, for caring reasons, this is for your health, this is for the good of the society, and any voice against it is not to be listened to, because within a sort of a bigger zeitgeist. So that was my first question. But listening to you, another question dropped out was around the question of mRNA technologies, which have been used again under that conversation of cares control, and a lot of people have chosen to have mRNA. Some people have been, lots of people have been coerced into it. Some people have been forced into it, like you lose your job if you don't have it. And this is brand new technology which validates on a massive scale genetic modification and genetics. So that's another question that's kind of dropped out of that carers control. So I just was interested in your response. Thank you.
So as I mentioned, I've just done this new book, which has been published in Italian, From Greed to Care. And part of what I've put in the book is all the double speak, how every word that we have used in life and living processes has been converted into a word that signifies profits and control. Yeah. So I'll give you just 3 words. So economy basically means the art of living. It's been reduced to the money machine. And I have a new book that was done a few years ago when I saw the billionaires take over the climate discussion. It's called Oneness versus 1%, and it's been published by New Internationalists in England. But when I watched the Green Revolution destroy Punjab, I then started to look, because the meeting I was invited at, the issue of genetic engineering. And like I said, I helped write the legal frameworks for biosafety, but I've done 2 books. One is called Biopiracy, and I want to quote from here, because I study these things by studying others who've studied this all the time. And one of the most brilliant geneticists is Richard Leventon, who wrote a book called The Doctrine of DNA. He was a Harvard biologist. And the language being created, and most people also don't know that the roots of genetic engineering come in genetic determinism and genetic reductionism. And genetic determinism comes from eugenics. And the people who had failed with the Hitler project to make eugenics the lasting thing were all picked up in America and supported by Rockefeller. And they had a whole system they called social psychology of defining inferiority in your biology, but they said because now biology, superficially, biological determinism is not politically correct, let's look for the atoms of determinism inside. They started to talk about atoms of determinism long before Watson and Crick had a gene. Yeah, they had named atoms of determinism, and it's fascinating. There's a book by Lily Kay, a historian of science from Harvard, called The Molecular Vision of Life. But, you know, Leventon, a geneticist, is saying the DNA, which is called a master molecule, is a dead molecule. Among the most non-reactive, chemically inert molecules in the world, it has no power to reproduce itself. It is rather, it is produced out of the elementary particles by a complex cellular machinery of proteins. While it is often said that DNA produces proteins, in fact, proteins and enzymes produce DNA. And then they go on to talk about how the RNA is really the regulatory process. Yeah. So I've seen a lot of comments saying RNA is just a messenger. They're still using DNA as the master molecule, and therefore distorting what is happening with the mRNA technology. And these are the top scientists of the world telling you, in the middle of all of this, they were, you know, the top geneticists were showing, and, you know, and these are people not working on pharmaceutical or anything of the kind, but they were saying the whole mechanism is being described in such a false way. So, and coming to the issue of care, three simple issues. Care is a living process of actually caring. And it's caring, listening, hearing, sharing the pain. Gandhi talked about, he had a beautiful song, you know, Vaishnav Janda Tainika Ye Jo Peer Padai Janari. He says the divinity is in those who can understand the pain of the other. So the language of care is control does not talk about pain of the other. It does not talk about listening. It is laying the foundations of coercive imposition of tools without asking. Now, I've been long enough in the science technology studies field to know that technologies are merely tools, and democratic societies choose the tools, participate in the choice, and know about the tools. Any tool imposed on people without their consent is part of an authoritarian structure. Technologies are not above society, they are part of the social structure. And then we're elevated above society to justify violence and to describe carelessness as care. That's when authoritarianism is coming now through the root of the tools of the billionaires. And the technology billionaires should make us wake up to what tools are about. I have a chapter in Oneness versus 1% on the tools of the money machine.
Thank you, Vandana. Marcus, you had a question for Vandana about the international transfer of food and seeds.
Yes, first of all, thank you very much for your speech. I also am a big fan. I have several of your books. Myself being from the Netherlands, I still sometimes think of things contextually, thinking of the settings, and we are, you know, very much far away from a lot of the food that we produce. And, you know, internationally, people talk about seeds and food as well, and they see the value in it, opening cultural dialogue among different cultures. But of course, we are distorting nature continuously by continually transferring seeds. And right now I just feel, maybe it's a very big and complicated question, but how do you look at this constant process of the transfer of seeds and foods internationally?
Okay, so the first is actually seeds have traveled the world. Otherwise, India wouldn't have had millets. They came from the Horn of Africa, but they were already here during the Mohenjo-daro civilization. You know, they found in the ruins of Mohenjo-daro old millet seeds. Seeds have moved during wars. Women have always taken seeds in the hems of their frocks, hidden in their refugee processes. The difference between seeds that are a result of conversation between the earth and people is they don't get adapted to new conditions if new conditions are not right for them. The new seeds have been spread to be dominant, to be monocultures, the hybrids, the GMOs. And therefore you do need regulation of their movement. You know, therefore you need the whole phytosanitary issue. The phytosanitary issue has evolved really because you're now breeding seeds that don't really grow from the test of a dialogue with the earth or are adapted to eating or different cultures. So we do need regulation of the movement of seed, but I don't think we need to imagine that for 10,000 years, seeds didn't move. Seeds have moved. Nature moves seeds. How do the birds take seeds from here to there? Yeah. So that's not the problem. The problem is the seeds that have evolved from nature do not spread new contamination, new genetic contamination, new Roundup resistant genes, new Bt toxin genes in the wrong place. And they don't become dominant. Yeah. So we do need we need more biodiversity intensification in farming everywhere, including in Europe, in North America, everywhere, which are green deserts today. What I have learned in my years of work is the more biodiversity there is, there's more food, there's more nutrition. You know, we instead of measuring yield per acre, we measure nutrition and health per acre. So by intensifying biodiversity, we actually grow more food. Intensifying biodiversity means working with the biodiversity of the place. So not all food comes from seeds from somewhere else. We've got a huge program on wild undercultivated edibles. There's a very nice restaurant a young man started in No More, something it's called, in Copenhagen. And all he serves is wild harvested edibles. Yeah. So I think, you know, colonialism, reductionism, commodification shrunk our mind, took our 100 varieties of crops we ate to the 12 globally traded commodities and now to the 4 genetically modified communities. We have to open our minds again and say, let's find food wherever it is and share the food with all other beings. And then we don't have to worry because we'll intensify nutrition while lowering the pressure on the earth. The current system destroys the earth with a huge ecological footprint, empties out food of nutrition, and punishes the earth, the farmer, and the eater. Yeah, that doesn't do a very good job. But I would like to see biodiversity grow everywhere. And also I say colonialism, just like it created this illusion of civilizing nation, it created this crazy idea of the wild and the uncultivated as a divide. But anything that's free is wild. And you can work in cultivation with the freedom of the seed. And then the seed is wild. And that wild seed is free for the bee. And it's wild for the soil organisms. So there is this barrier between the wild and the domesticated is a colonial barrier. And I see it taken over, you know, this idea of rewilding is push the peasants off the land. No, grow the diversity on farmland. Let the peasants stay. Let there be more diversity on farm. You know, this animosity that's grown against farmers is part of these many mythologies. And we will not be able to protect the planet if we have more acreages of GMO soya and then patches of rewilding that have removed the farmers, and all this feeding into the carbon trade and carbon offsetting. Yeah, and my new book has big chapters on the false solutions to climate change. Yeah, not just the fake burgers, but geoengineering, net zero carbon trading. You know, we'll keep polluting, we'll keep our private jets. Yeah, and then we'll take your land as the sink. You know, what's his name? The person who used to head Bank of England, Mark Carney. I had a debate with him before the COP26. But he's the master. He's the master, as they call it, the plumbing of net zero, financial plumbing of net zero. I said they got so ontologically confused. They forgot the earth doesn't run on the currency of money. She has many other currencies. And so I think we need to not assume colonialism, not assume industrialism, have the conversation with indigenous cultures and see how they work, have the conversation with the earth and our biodiversity, and all kinds of options grow in terms of where we can go into the future.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thanks for the question, Marcus. Thank you, Vandana. Please feel free to add any more questions, but I know Helena has a couple of questions she'd like to close with. Unless anyone else comes up with another question, I'll hand over to Helena now, please.
Vandana, I think actually my questions follow really well from what you've just said, because, you know, what you've just said is you've given us some of your thoughts on the way forward. And what a sort of link point is, one, I'd love you to say a little bit more about the seed banks you're involved in, because I think seed banks are really hopeful for the future. So that's one question. But my other question is, I really like your idea of earth conversations with seeds. And I'm very involved. I live in the inner city, Manchester. I'm very involved with my neighbors and we're planting trees. And I just wondered any thoughts you have about planting trees as a way forward, you know, because I think one of the things you offer us is a positive vision. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Elena. When I heard of patenting seed and privatizing life and ownership, you know, the private property in land was bad enough in colonialism, but to own life as private property and intellectual property, and in my mind, I said, here's a corporation who's a fiction. You know, corporations are fiction, legal fiction. They're not persons. They're pretend persons. You know, the 300 merchant adventurers who became the East India Company. They were not the 300 people. They were the fiction of the East India Company. And now this fictitious personhood claims intellectual property on products of the mind, and nature is popping out of this fiction. Yeah. So basically, the seed banks are a reclaiming of seed in its commons, and commons is the collective communication. Yeah, it's the commons of caring for the seed, of exchanging seed. I see it as reclaiming. Yeah, intellectual property criminalizes seed saving and seed sharing. That was my gut reaction. I said, seed saving and seed sharing is our duty. You cannot criminalize it, and we will not work on that. So we did the seed satyagraha. So seed banks are reclaiming the commons of seed, through it the shaving and the sharing of seed, through it creating the abundance, the resilience, and avoiding the poverty trap. You know, our farmers have got into such deep traps with the dependence on seed. I can tell you for the cotton, BT cotton is Monsanto's monopoly. 400,000 Indian farmers have committed suicide since 95 when the seed market was opened up. 85% of the suicides are in the cotton areas. 95% of the cotton, according to our competition commission, is a BT cotton now. Yeah? And as I mentioned, the price went from 5 rupees to 4,000 rupees. So reclaiming the seed as a commons, we realize has created the economy of prosperity and abundance. It's created the true economy of caring and sharing and freedom. But we didn't realize then that we would be saving seeds for climate resilience. And these seed banks are the answers to climate resilience. We didn't realize then that we were saving seeds of nutritionally dense crops. I'm going to start a whole research project on actually measuring our old seeds, which were called low productivity, primitive, and how much more nutrition they have than what is being pushed in the name of high yielding. But most importantly, the seed banks have recreated community. Yeah, communities have come alive around the seed. And as far as trees are concerned, you know, part of what the whole first the commodification of forests and the enclosures of forests did was turn forests into timber. And colonial trade reduced rice and wheat into a tradable commodity. Forests themselves disappeared from farms. And, you know, because I've worked on this whole colonial period so long, when the settlement was written, you know, the most richest part of India's mangroves, the Sundarbans, which we share with Bangladesh, it was called wasteland, because wasteland was what doesn't give you profits. And, you know, rent from the taxes. The richest area was just starting to cut down. My father was a forest conservator, and he used to tell us there were more forests on the farms of India than in the forests of India, because of farms. And, you know, just like there's no wild and domesticated divide, there was no crop and tree divide. Our systems were beautiful networks of symbiosis between trees and perennials. Animals were vital to it, and annual crops themselves in mixtures. So diversity of trees, animals, and crops in concert. Yeah, the nitrogen fixing plants working with the cereals and the oil seed. So, and trees also have seeds. Trees also give fruits. So I think we need to have we need to overcome these ruptures that were created and create the new unities through mutuality and symbiosis. And conversation. For me, what's symbiosis? Conversation. Healthy conversation. Positive conversation. There's toxic non-conversation. Conversation is nourishment and giving life to the other.
That's lovely. Thank you.
Thank you, Helena. We are getting very close to the end of the evening. Jagdish, I'd like to hand over to you to with some closing thoughts, possibly.
Yes, thank you, Gwen. Thank you, Helena. Thank you, Vandana. Vandana, if I could squeeze in one last question or thought from you. To all of us attending and listening to you this evening, what do you think is the role of the citizen, of the concerned citizen, who listens and who understands and still feels the weight of a direction that doesn't look right? What would you, as a leader in this movement, expect a Gwen to be doing, a ASP to be doing, a Jagdish to be doing, a Helena to be doing, a Marcus to be doing, anyone in this room to be doing? What would you not only expect, maybe demand or ask of us? I would like to, you know.
Yes, Jagdish, I never expect and I never demand. I think it's not a conversation. But I do see that we have been deprived of our true citizenship, which is a citizenship of being part of the earth. It's, you know, the cutting off of our very linkages to the earth is what the Industrial Revolution and colonialism is about. Colonialism is uproot the people, you know, call their land empty land, take away the land. Industrialism is about saying, oh, all we need to do is dig 600 million years of our fossil fuels and forget the earth. You know, she is meaning this. Everything the earth gives is primitive. Everything the fossil fuel gives is developed, you know, and progress. And these are heavy, but I think industrialism as a colonizing element is deeper than the first wave of pre-industrial colonialism. And I think that's why Gandhi is so important to our time. I think the only political thinker and actor who put industrialism at the heart of his conversation. You know, of course, colonialism, but industrial colonialism. He was talking in Hind Swaraj about the systems that it was creating. So on the one hand, it said, no, you can't produce, you know, that's a primitive way. Your spinning wheel is primitive. But more, your only consumption is of factory-made clothing. And that's why Gandhi said we'll make our own cloth. But we've all been made consumers now, and the capacity to produce itself is being taken from us. And I think between lockdown and shutting down small businesses and all of that economic cruelty is part of the plan of saying, let's shut down economy. Let's shut down independent economic livelihoods because they come in the way. Yeah. Just like seed caving comes in the way of seed empires and bioimperialism, making your own garden comes in the way of fake food empires. Having your little cafe comes in the way of a huge thing. So I think we've got to reclaim our creative capacities. And our creative capacities, if we do it only within the ecological apartheid of anthropocentrism, we will not explore enough of our potential. Our creative potential must be a co-creation with the earth. That's why I keep coming back to earth conversation, yeah? Then we realize, my God, a little bit of organic matter to the soil, and then the earth does the rest. It's not all on my bird, on my shoulders, yeah? I have to be in service of the earth. Therefore, shifting from consumer citizenship or non-citizenship to earth citizenship, playing all the roles that being part of the earth involves, including real care, true sharing, and the recovery of the commons. And I would add the ultimate lesson of Gandhi. I think we need it much, 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 much more. That if you're not happy with your rulers, you have an obligation to not cooperate. And when he was asked, how did he come up with Satyagraha? How did he come up with civil disobedience? He said, I didn't come up with it. I just observed how India had stayed free and democratic over millennia. So to have that power to not cooperate with the domination that's basically sapping us of all potential, we have to start cooperating more with the earth to reclaim our true freedom. So Satyagraha goes hand in hand with Swaraj and Swadeshi. Because if you don't shift to the earth as your citizenship, you will not have the power to say no. And once you say no with the power of your conversation with the earth, that's a very powerful.
Wonderful. Wonderful. This is so nice. Gwen, are we close to closing time, or you want to take another question, or should we head towards, or would you like to ask a question, Gwen, before we close?
Well, I would, but my question would probably trigger at least another 2 hours conversation, and but I will ask it anyway, because it does trigger such a long conversation. We should be glad to host it. Vandana, I'm choosing my words carefully after Jagdish's question, but you mentioned some time and you've personified how the role that women can play in creating our future. Well, I just wondered whether you could talk maybe about the differences you perceive in what role women should be playing in creating it, and what opportunities they are actually being given.
Well, women are never given opportunities. They take responsibility. And I think that is the issue. Women have been pushed to the margin and the margin and the margin. And from the margin, because they live the true economy of care, they live the true compassion, they constantly create ways in which to take care of life, their children's life, their community's life. And because the economy of care was turned into a non-economy, it doesn't exist, it doesn't get counted, women's work doesn't get counted, women's knowledge doesn't get counted, it's been treated as non-existent, but just as nature's creativity was treated as non-existent in a world of a dead earth paradigm, women's work not being seen didn't make that work disappear. Women's knowledge being criminalized during the witch hunts didn't make that knowledge less relevant. It's more relevant than ever before. And I've done forwards to books by brilliant women, particularly in Latin America, where they have a huge movement against femicide. And they have a sentence at the end of one of these books. And we are the witches that you could not kill. Because 9 million people were killed in Europe during the witch hunts. 9 million. And we don't even count them in the violence. So it's not about a genetic difference between men and women. It's about the fact that capitalist patriarchy, the greed combined with patriarchy, kept pushing women out of work, women out of fields, women out of knowledge, women out of science. And on the margins, they had to keep doing what needed to be done. So in my book, Staying Alive, I was really trying to understand, how do they stay alive? And I'm now realizing, God, all of humanity has to learn how to stay alive. And that's where you learn it from. Those who were on the margins. And even in ecosystems, you know, it's the margins where ecosystems meet when new things start to happen. And again, coming back to Gandhi's relevance, Gandhi used to say a daily prayer. Besides saying, caring for the pain of the other is true divinity in us, he also used to say, Mujhko aur istri mein banao. He says, make me more womanly. And for him, womanly was more compassion. And, you know, he was constantly learning it from his own wife. And we celebrated his 150th anniversary with reproducing a sari he had hand woven for her. And we make it with the organic cotton we produce. It's beautiful with the leaf. We made it by hand. So to be compassionate is because it was banned from masculinity as defined by the greed economy. Yeah, warfare, domination, making money was masculinity, manufactured, totally manufactured. That's why I never say men do this and women do this. No. Well, men were forced into this violence. Women were forced into another violence. But because women didn't stop caring, they continued to generate and regenerate life. And that power to regenerate, power to care is what all of us have to practice, men and women. And the first is nature as teacher, indigenous people and women as teachers. And I think together we can make sure people aren't without food, people aren't without shelter, people aren't without meaning in life. You know, for me, the idea that a metaverse can generate more money for Mr. whatever is his name, what's his name? Zuckerberg, Mr. Zuckerberg, you know, to make you escape from reality in this virtual world of a fake reality. At a time where everyone's livelihoods and economies are collapsing is cruel. Because economy is about art of living and women have kept it alive and we have to together keep it alive. Being human means about living, about working, about being part of the earth and having daily earth conversations as the power to live.
Thank you very much for those words.
Wonderful.
Helena,
So
before
nice.
I finally close the meeting, would you have a last few words?
Thank you. Just to say, and we really, really appreciate it. And I think what I'd like to say to you is you've brought some light, because it can feel there's a lot not going right at the moment. And I think you've brought some light and you've brought some ways forward that we can think about and debate. And that is the whole point, as you say, of Earth Conversations. We're keeping these going. It's something that is generative. So thank you so much. And I will think of you when I'm out in the community planting seeds, and I will talk about Earth Conversations. So thank you.
Thank you.
And
Thank you all.
Vandana ji, the word that stays with me is what you said so beautifully, recreating abundance, life, abundance, sharing, caring. These are such powerful words. They're so simple. They're so inspiring. I think we take these thoughts, they'll stay with us, and maybe we'll continue this conversation in some form or the other between ASP and you. Thank you so much. I can only say that.
Thank you all.
Oh, well.
Bye-bye.
Yo. Thank you so
Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't wish to be the last voice, but what we will do now, we have a recording of this, which we will look at for any editing that we need to do, but we'll make that available on the website the next couple of weeks. If you go to our website, which is sustainabilitypractitioners.org, there is a whole section on the Earth Conversations, and we'll place it there. So thank you all very much for your brilliant questions. Thank Vandana for her time, and keep in contact. We will keep in contact with you where we can as well via the newsletter. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you. Good night. Thank you.